The slap that silenced 200 students was supposed to break her. But instead, it awakened something unstoppable. Before you dive in, hit subscribe so you never miss the stories that flip humiliation into power, fear into fire, and victims into legends. The slap cracked across the courtyard like lightning, ripping the sky apart, a sound so sharp and sudden that every conversation, every footstep, every laugh from the 200 students dissolving out of fifth period evaporated into stunned silence as Mia Renfield staggered backward, her cheek blazing red, her breath stolen by shock, her books exploding from her arms and skittering across the concrete like frightened birds. But even as humiliation crashed into her in a sickening wave, the sneers from the trio of self-appointed queens of Ridgewood High, Brianna, Crystal, and Taylor, poured over her like gasoline, and instead of breaking, instead of shrinking, instead of letting their laughter become the soundtrack of her defeat, something inside her that she never knew existed snapped awake, something sharp and steady and ancient, though she didn't yet know what it would cost her or how far it would take her. But before all of that, before her response changed the trajectory of not only her life but the entire school's culture, she did what no one expected. She picked up the pen that had rolled to Brianna's expensive sneakers, the sneakers Brianna bragged about costing more than Mia's entire wardrobe, and calmly, quietly, she said, "You're going to want to remember this moment," her voice so steady that it rattled even the observing teachers pretending not to see the bullying they'd been ignoring for years, and Brianna, incredulous at being spoken to as if she were not the sun around which everyone revolved, barked out a cruel laugh, flipping her hair with the same dramatic flair she used during school announcements, then leaned in and hissed, "What are you gonna do, farm girl? Cry?" Which was ironic because Mia hadn't cried in years, not since her father disappeared without warning and left her and her mother to run the tiny auto shop that barely kept the lights on, and certainly not since Brianna's clique discovered her secret, that Mia was the unwed pregnant girl, from the rumors whispered throughout the village she grew up in before moving to Ridgewood, a rumor rooted in real pain, the kind of rural cruelty that forced her and her mother to flee. But the truth was more complicated, darker, and something Mia had vowed to bury forever. Yet now, under the hot glare of 100 phones raised to record her humiliation, Mia inhaled slowly, let her voice slice through their laughter, and said, "I'm not here to cry. I'm here to end this," shocking everyone, especially herself, because in her mind flashed the nights in the village when she'd been shamed, ostracized, and even slapped by elders for a pregnancy she never carried, for a lie fabricated by a boy who sought to protect someone else and used her as the shield, a lie that forced her to endure months of torture, public shaming, isolation, forced confessions, before her innocence surfaced too late, and the trauma carved itself into her bones. But now, faced with yet another slap, another humiliation, another attempt to define her with someone else's cruelty, she felt that old fire ignite. She bent down, collected her books, and instead of retreating, stood tall and began asking students around her a simple question: "Did you see what happened?" Not in panic but in purposeful, deliberate clarity, and students, confused yet intrigued, murmured yes, causing Brianna to scoff loudly, "Oh please, nobody cares." But Mia looked directly at Brianna and said, "Good. Because everyone just became a witness," and with that she walked, not ran, to the principal's office, trailed by a silent crowd who had never seen anyone challenge Brianna before, and the principal, a man more afraid of the queen bee's parents than the moral decay of the school, tried to dismiss her, but Mia calmly placed her hand over her cheek, still burning with the imprint of a bully's arrogance, and said, "I want to file a formal report, and I want every witness outside to give their statement." And when the principal hesitated, the crowd, still growing, began murmuring, "Let her speak," creating a pressure he had never faced, and reluctantly, he agreed. But the real twist was only beginning because Ridgewood High was owned, yes, owned, by a national education foundation, and that foundation had just appointed a new interim director. Alexander Hale, the reclusive young CEO whose rise to success was shrouded in mystery, a man known for firing entire boards when they ignored abuse reports, and when Mia's case, supported by 200 witness statements and dozens of videos, landed on his desk that evening, he didn't just take interest, he became obsessed with understanding how a girl so young stood with such quiet defiance in the face of power dynamics that crushed others. He watched the videos repeatedly, noting her posture, her expression, the way she didn't tremble once, and something about her reminded him of his own past, of the mother who had endured humiliation to protect him, of the childhood he had clawed his way out of. And instead of delegating the investigation, he personally scheduled an unannounced visit to the school the next morning, and when he arrived, the entire campus erupted in whispers, but none louder than Brianna's group's shock at seeing a limousine pull up next to the courtyard where they'd humiliated Mia, and Mia, who had no idea someone powerful had taken her side, was in the counselor's office when Alexander Hale walked in, tall, poised, dressed in charcoal gray with a gaze that pierced through people as though he were evaluating the entire architecture of their soul, and when he saw Mia sitting there clutching her binder but still holding her chin high, he said, "Miss Renfield, I saw the footage," and Brianna, who had been called in too, sneered, "So what?" But Alexander held up one hand, silencing her in a way no teacher ever had, then added, "And effective immediately, I am expelling the students responsible for the assault," and the gasp that tore from Brianna felt like poetic repayment for every cruel jab she had inflicted on weaker classmates, but Mia, stunned, said, "Wait, I don't want their lives ruined. I want change," and that was the moment Alexander truly looked at her, seeing not just courage but compassion forged through suffering, and he said quietly, "What do you want?" And Mia, who hadn't been asked what she wanted in years, said, "Accountability. Real, lasting accountability," and Alexander nodded slowly, adjusting his decision to mandatory intervention programs, anti-bullying curriculum, and public apologies recorded school-wide, all because she asked for fairness rather than vengeance. But as the days passed, the school transformed in ways students had never imagined, teachers empowered, bystanders emboldened, cliques terrified of crossing lines, and Mia unintentionally became a symbol of resistance, though she never sought the spotlight, and Alexander found himself returning to the school far more than necessary, drawn by the grounded strength she carried like a second skin. Meanwhile, Brianna, furious at being dethroned, sought revenge by digging into Mia's past, discovering the rural village scandal, and during lunch one day she blasted the rumor through the speakers she illegally hacked, announcing, "Maybe Mia thinks she's some hero, but don't forget she was shamed for being pregnant at 14, maybe someone else should slap her again to remind her." But her plan backfired spectacularly because instead of shrinking, Mia stepped onto a cafeteria table, voice trembling but strong, and revealed the truth, how the village elders tortured her, how she carried a burden for someone else's mistake, how she became their scapegoat to preserve someone else's reputation. And as she spoke, students cried, staff listened, and Alexander, who had arrived early that day and stood in the doorway, felt something twist painfully in his chest, realizing he wasn't just respecting her, he was beginning to care for her, deeply. And when the villagers who ruined her life resurfaced online, mocking her for playing victim, Alexander used his influence to launch an independent investigation into the abuses Mia suffered, exposing corruption, punishing the elders, and clearing her name publicly. But he did more. He invited Mia and her mother to move to a city program his foundation fully funded, offering scholarships, housing, and therapy. And at first she refused, unwilling to seem dependent, but he told her gently, "Strength isn't about surviving alone. It's about letting people stand with you," and for the first time, she allowed support. Their connection deepened as he guided her through rebuilding the parts of herself she had buried, though he battled the ethics of falling for someone younger, someone he wanted to protect rather than dominate. But Mia, wise beyond her years from hardship, told him softly, "Don't pity me. See me," and he did, fully. The final twist came during a national education conference months later, when Mia was invited to speak about resilience, and halfway through her speech, Brianna, now reformed after months of mandated reflection, surprisingly apologized on stage, shocking everyone, and Mia hugged her, proving forgiveness wasn't weakness but power. Afterward, Alexander walked onto the stage, adjusted the microphone, and said in front of the entire country, "Students like Mia Renfield don't just survive bullying, they redefine leadership. And if she'll allow it, I intend to support her for the rest of my life." Words that made the audience gasp because everyone recognized the subtext, and Mia, eyes shining, whispered into the microphone, "That sounds suspiciously like a proposal," and he answered, "Then say yes someday, on your terms." And though she didn't give an answer then, the world already knew that the slap meant to humiliate her became the spark that ignited a revolution, a love story, a reckoning, and a legacy that proved one truth: when a girl who has been broken chooses to rise, nothing, absolutely nothing, can stop her.